Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Bear Down Ballers. I'm Ryan Wall, joined by Jordan Pollock as always. And 2026 is here. I want to wish all of our viewers, listeners, a happy new year into 2026. In Arizona, they ended 2025 in a big way with a 99-71 victory over South Dakota State, and they have started the year 13-0, which is their best start since the 2013-14 season, and it's the fourth time that they've started a season with 13 consecutive victories. So just a historic, incredible start for Tommy Lloyd's squad. Jordan, happy New Year. How are you doing? And what are your thoughts on this recent Arizona win?
Happy New Year and super excited for this team to kind of see what they're really made of, especially in some road environments in the Big 12 play.
Yeah, I can't wait for it. Yeah, we'll get into their first two matchups in the Big 12 against Utah, against Kansas State later on. But I wanted to start off with Arizona's 28-point victory against South Dakota State, and they were dominating this game towards the end of the second half into the end of the first half into the second half. And the guy I wanted to start off with is somebody who had an elite start to his freshman season, but recently we haven't seen that elite production that we were accustomed to early on, and that's Koa Pete, who dropped 19 points on 7 of 12 shooting from the field. He made a three-pointer and he had 14 rebounds, 3 assists as well. This was one of his best performances in over a month, and it's the most points that he scored since his first game against Florida when he dropped 30 points. Jordan, what'd you think about Pete in this one?
Yeah, and I know we've been kind of talking about him and how he's tapered off, but like I said, I think a lot of it's usage. And in this game, he had a lot more usage, shooting a ball 12 times. You said two of them were three attempts. He hit one of them, and his ability, especially on the boards, really helped them. And I really don't think he's really dropped off much. It's just his usage and his points in the box score really doesn't look like what it was from that first game in Vegas when they played Florida.
Yeah, 100% I agree with that. And that's what we were saying last week is I was harping on his volume, and he had 12 field goals, which stands out because that's the most amount of field goals that he's attempted since November 29th against Norfolk State. So it was great to see that. And it was great to see that when he gets going, he gains more confidence throughout the game, and he continues to just be featured in this Arizona offense. And I love to see it because he's such a dominant player when he gets the ball and when he's aggressive. And it seems like it's not a coincidence that when his offense is at a high level, his rebounding follows, and another double double for the 5-star freshman in Koa P. Is there anyone else who stood out to you in this one?
Definitely. And I think it feels like one of his first games where he's kind of led, especially the front court in rebounds. Especially we talked about how just dominant of a rebounder Awaka is in the country. And the other main player I thought from this game, especially, is Mo Krivos, 13 points, 11 boards, and 6 blocks. I think it's like we talk about these mid-major games, and it's kind of hard to look, especially with the size and the just the athlete difference that separates these two teams. But I think if your big guys can show up, especially in these games where there is definitely a mismatch, I think that's a huge thing to be able to take going forward.
Yeah, for sure. It was his second double double of the season. And yeah, he's another guy who he's had his ups and downs being aggressive and not, but this one he was another guy who was efficient. Arizona's a team 53% from the field. Krivas himself 5 for 8. He also added three made points from the free throw line. He was excellent in this one as well. Him and Awaka combined for 23 points, 18 boards, and they just continue to create one of the best front courts. We keep saying it, but I want to keep harping on it because I don't think these guys get the recognition they deserve because they're that good and they play the game the right way. They're not guys that are getting the ball a ton every night, but in the minutes that they get, they just dominate. Mo Krivas only 23 minutes, 13 and 11. Toby Awaka only 18 minutes, 10 and 7. It really it's just elite production. You can't ask much more from your front court than these two guys are giving you.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think just continuing with the efficiency, not just them, but still having six guys in double figures just tells so much about how well this team is flowing together. Nobody's super selfish about taking all the shots, but they're also ready when their name's called.
Nah, for sure. Something Arizona hasn't done the best job this season, and that is 3-point shooting. But they did a pretty good job in this one of 3-point shooting. They made 9 3-pointers on 23 attempts, 39% from three. The three guys made 2 3-pointers. That is Jaden Bradley, Braden Berries, and Ivan Karchenkov. I wanted to get to Jaden Bradley because he's the third Arizona player to record a double double in this game, and it's his first double double of the season. 13 points, 10 assists from Arizona's star point guard. And Jaden Bradley is another guy that he's not the flashiest, but he comes to play every single night, whether it's against South Dakota State, whether it's against Florida. Jaden Bradley is as rock solid and as elite of a point guard as you'll find in the country. And yeah, it just goes to show you that when you look at this Arizona team on a nightly basis, every single player, they just always come to play. They always show up. And to me, that's the difference for this Arizona team. And we talk about the depth, and that's true. It's just because everybody contributes every single game, and that's what makes this team so good. And that's why they've won 13 straight games, and they started the season 13-0 for the first time in over a decade, because this team we've compared them in the past to past Arizona teams. I think we could say that they're the best Arizona team in the last decade, and one of the best Arizona teams in a long time. Yes, we're gonna have to wait and see how they do later in the season, but starting a year, it couldn't have gone much better up until this point than it has.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I just want to capitalize like the letter T in team. Like we're not saying that Jaden Bradley's the best Arizona player the last ten years. We can't say that. Like there's been a number one overall pick from this school before, and there's been other lottery picks. But the way that this team, especially eight deep, how well that they've played with four of them being freshmen is just an absurd thing. And the combination of having veterans, having the freshmen, how well they've kind of come together is just something I don't think I've really feel like I've seen really much. And I know the last few years with NIL, the transfer portal, we've seen kind of at least the revolution of the one and done and teams being built that way, and the success of that not being super great. Duke being the major outlier last year of that. But teams they want to get older, they want to get veterans, especially nowadays we can get 25, 26-year-olds that are playing overseas and going to the NBA.
Don't get me started on that.
But it's just so different and unique to see these freshmen and veterans kind of coming together and being able to play their roles and create chemistry and continuity together so quickly.
Yeah, and you hit the nail on the head right there about Arizona not having any single player stand out among the pack, because I do agree. And you've seen other, mid people put out mid-season all American teams, and none of Arizona's players that I've seen have been on any of these lists. And because none of Arizona's players, we've talked about it in the past, but none of them are averaging an absurd amount of points or stats or anything like that. Koa Pete actually, after this game, jumped ahead of Braden Berries at 14.2 points. Berries is now at 14 of the leading scorer for Arizona. They're going tit for tat every single game, it seems like. But yeah, that's what makes this team different, is because it's something we haven't especially seen at Arizona in a long time, especially when you have so many freshmen and two top 15 freshmen in the country. I haven't seen two top 15 freshmen buy into a winning culture like Berries and Pete have, especially in a long time in the country. But Jordan, I want to move on and talk about Arizona beginning Big 12 play because they start their Big 12 schedule on January 3rd on Saturday at 2 p.m. local time in Arizona, 4 p.m. on the East Coast. The game is being broadcast on Peacock and NBC Sports Network, and they're facing a team in Utah who's 8-5 on the season, and they have lost two of their last three games. They are coming off a 74-65 loss to Washington, and before that, they lost to Mississippi State. So this team really has struggled, especially when they've have faced that, a team from a power conference. They have three players averaging double figures, and they're led by Terrence Brown, who's averaging 21 and a half. Don McHenry, another talented guard, 18.3 per game. What are your first thoughts on this matchup against the Utes?
Yeah, it's interesting, and I just mentioned about the transfer portal, and that's something that's very real with this Utah team. Alex Jensen's their first year head coach. He played at Utah in the '90s, and really they only bring back one player really on their entire roster, and Keanu Dawes, and he's averaged close to a double double, 9.2 rebounds per game and 12 points per game. But they're just very different than they were last year. And like you said, they've been struggling quite a bit. And so I don't really see a lot of, I don't want to say competitiveness because it's like, again, it is, I guess, Big 12 slash Pac 12 renewed rivalry, which I wouldn't even really call it a rivalry, but I don't really see this game being super competitive down the stretch.
Yeah.
But yeah, those are some of my thoughts.
Yeah, Arizona on Ken Palm, just to put things in perspective, Arizona is ranked number two on Ken Palm, and you scroll all the way down, Utah is ranked 126th. They have the 192nd best defensive rating, 94th best offensive rating. That just puts in perspective how they have struggled this season on offense and on defense, and they have shown flashes on offense, but they're just way too inconsistent. In three of the last five games, they've scored 74 or fewer points, and yeah, I really think they're going to struggle to keep up with Arizona in this one. They only average a little over 80 points per game. I think Arizona will win this one handedly, and I think Arizona's X factor is not going to be their guards, is going to be their front court, led by Toby Awaka, Mo Krivas, and Koa Pete. I really think Arizona needs to rely on those guys a lot because I just think that might be Utah's weakest part of their team because they, like I mentioned, their top two players are guards, and they just lack in the front court. Well, how do you see this one playing out?
Definitely. I think Arizona is able to stretch this one towards the end of the game. I'd probably give them probably like 9.5, 10.5 spread. But I do want to point out too, you mentioned their guards. Terrence Brown's their leading scorer, averaging 21 and a half. That's right at 11th in the country. That's not something to squabble about, I don't think, especially making that jump. He was at Fairleigh Dickinson. I think
Yep.
that's FDU, the team that made a huge run a few years ago in the tournament. So he's a mid-major transfer up, and he could get going, and that's something. Especially it feels like in the last few years when Arizona's played lesser competition, it's usually a star will come out if they get upset and will just go crazy. So I think that is one matchup potentially to watch, especially how Arizona can defend them.
Yeah, I do think he could give Arizona a little bit of problems, but I think if Arizona can stretch him out deep, force some threes early from him, that'll slow down his production. And seeing Utah struggle against, teams from major conferences is one thing, but now they're facing the number one team in the country in Arizona, and this is their first ranked opponent of the season. So to go from facing ranked teams that aren't even that great, and losing to them, they lost to Cal Poly and Grand Canyon earlier in the season. So I think this one is going to be. I think it could be a blowout. I think Arizona is going to win this one by at least 20 points. I really do. I know it's on the road. I know Utah is returning home after they lost their previous game. But yeah, I just think Arizona Arizona is on a different level than Utah is. So it sounds like we're both taking Arizona to begin Big 12 play 1-0. But let's move on to their second game against Kansas State. They play Kansas State this Saturday or this Wednesday after their Saturday game. Wednesday, January 7th against Kansas State at 9 p.m. on the East Coast on FS1. This is a home game, Arizona's first home Big 12 matchup of the season. Jordan, how do you see this one playing out between the Wildcats and the Wildcats?
Yeah, I think this one, I think definitely could be a little different. I was saying earlier, really the one game I watched from Kansas State was a game that they played at Creighton, and I could not believe the way they shot the ball. And so I think, especially if you look at a team like in that specific game, I think Abdi Bashir Jr. was his name, 6 of 12 from three. Those are crazy numbers. If your team, if you got a guy doing that and your team isn't far behind him in percentages, right around the 40%, you have a chance of beating anybody if you shoot a stupid amount of threes. And so I think this one definitely will be a little bit more competitive than the Utah one, but especially because it is in Tucson, I think that definitely leads me a heavy favorite for Arizona. And I'd probably say probably around the same, probably like 9.5 spread, I would give it.
Yeah, Kansas State has been also up and down this season. At one point, they have suffered four straight losses, but now they've won four straight games. And just like Utah had one of the top scorers in the country, Kansas State also has one of the top scorers in the country with PJ Haggerty. The transfer from Memphis is averaging 22.9 points per game, the third most in college basketball. He scored 24 in each of his last two games, and he scored 28 before that. He only scored 10 versus Creighton. So he has had his ups and downs this season, but he has still shown his elite potential as one of the best veteran guards in the country. And surprisingly enough, another team that is great that their team is dominated by guards is Kansas State. Their top four leading scorers and four of their five players averaging double figures per night are all guards. So this is another matchup that Arizona could use their front court to their advantage, but they're gonna have their hands full with a bunch of talented guards. You mentioned Bashir, who's talented, Haggerty. They have David Castillo. They have Nate Johnson, who is a former Akron guard who is very talented in his own right. So and all these guys are pretty good 3-point shooters, especially Haggerty, Costello, and Bashir are all really good. They as a team they shoot 39.9% from three. So I think Arizona needs to make that a priority to be aggressive at the 3-point line. Don't allow any clean looks for Kansas State early in this game. And if they do that, I think Arizona could find success, and I think Arizona will find success. The last game against Utah, I had Arizona winning by 20, but this one, I think Arizona will win this game by at least 12 points. They return home, and it's their first home game in quite some time against a good opponent since they played Auburn back on December 6th. So over a month at that point. But yeah, I think Arizona's starting Big 12 play 2-0, a win over Utah, returning home with a win over Kansas State.
Yeah, definitely. And like you said, with how heavy they are with their guards and their scoring output and how many threes they shoot, that at times can be an equalizer, especially on the glass. If you're shooting a lot of threes, you're getting long rebounds, and that kind of does neutralize the size. And so that will be a big thing for Arizona is how they can hit the boards defensively. But if they're so guard heavy and they have fewer forwards in, that also leads a lot more opportunities for offensive rebounds. So for Arizona, I definitely agree with you. The bigger mismatch in this game is definitely going to be their front court and how well Owaka and Krivas and Pete can stay on the glass and finish down there when they get their opportunities.
Yeah, for sure. As I mentioned before we start recording, it's not, the best start to the Big 12 schedule. They're not playing the toughest opponents. They're kind of easing into Big 12 play this season, which is good and bad. It has its positive and negatives. Arizona enters Saturday's matchup against Utah, 41 and 31 against the Utes. They've won the last four matchups against Utah. Last time they lost to Utah was back in December of 2022. And against Kansas State, Arizona is 6 and 9. So they've struggled against Kansas State, but Arizona lost the last matchup last year, but they have won three of the last four meetings against Kansas State. And it's the first meeting and matchup against Kansas State since they played back in December of 1980. Arizona lost that one 55 to 53. So quite some time between meetings in Tucson for Arizona and Kansas State. I think that one will be a much better matchup, and I think it'll be closer than their game against Utah earlier in the week. But yeah, I think Arizona, they're 13 and 0. I think they're gonna advance to 15 and 0, and who knows how far this winning streak will kind of go. And Jordan, before we go, I wanted to ask you that question. How far do you think Arizona could keep winning? Because their best star is, they're off to their best start since 2013, 14, and in that season Arizona started 21 and 0. So do you think there's any chance Arizona could match or top that?
21 and 0. I think they'll have yeah, I think they'll have an opportunity to get to that. Especially with kind of the slate throughout most of this month. BYU will probably be the toughest challenge in so far in this month for sure, and finishing right after that game with our good old friends up north in Tempe. I do think I probably would put a little bit possibly of money on it. They could match that.
Yeah, speaking of that BYU game, actually, if they could get to that BYU game undefeated, Arizona would enter that game at 20 and 0, and if they would win that, they would be 21 and 0. So some pretty crazy things and just some added stakes to a game that and a matchup against BYU that is already highly anticipated, already will be an unbelievable game on January 26th. But Jordan, I want to thank everybody for tuning in today's episode of Bear Down Ballers. Thanks everyone for watching, viewing. I